Hello and welcome. My name is Tiffany Ram. I'm the host of Kid Monologues. And the purpose of this series is to have discussions about mixed kid experiences, specifically because I believe that racism can end in our lifetime, but first we have to acknowledge that racism even exists. And through my monologues, my personal experiences, and my ability to self-reflect and share these experiences with you, I hope to open a dialogue series after the first 4 episodes. So after today, there's one more episode, and then we'll actually jump into the second part of Mixed Kid Monologues, which is Mixed Kid Dialogues, having interviews with different kinds of mixed kids with different life experiences and how they've come into their own identity and processed racism if they ever experienced it in their lifetime. The idea is that through these conversations, through sharing my stories, I'm hoping 1, that I can empower other mixed kids, 2, help end racism, and 3, maybe give mixed kid parents some resources and insight into our experiences. Again, I do not have all the answers, but I do have the tools to get the conversation started. This week's really important, so I just want to remind you before we get started for you to go like this episode, share it with a friend or family member, and then also subscribe to Tiff Talk TV. There's more content coming, and there's old content in there that you will probably find pretty interesting. I'm going to take a moment before we get into this first episode to share this link with other people and invite people to come in the chat. If I see questions or comments come in the live chat, I'm going to make sure to address them throughout the video. Today has 2 parts. Today we'll be talking 1 about an interesting story of my identity, not necessarily racist, but definitely impacted how I internalized racism within myself, how I experienced being a mixed kid within my own family, and why I tell people often I was raised as just a tan white person. So I'm going to share a story that really illuminates that. If you haven't watched episode 1 and 2, I really encourage you to do that. It will give you a really vivid insight into my life experience and the dynamic of being raised as, essentially being all white. I said my parents raised me the only way they knew how, which was white mom and white stepdad, but I am still clearly very consciously a Black woman, and there were some really extreme scenarios and events that happened in my life that impacted me, that made me very aware that I'm Black and that Black meant I'm different. And so before I jump into that story, which then leads to why did I not know I was Black enough to apply for African-American, Black, and people of color scholarships for college, and how one very important mentor changed my perspective and actually gave me a scholarship I didn't know I even was eligible for. So before I do that, give me just 1 moment to break to share this link with people so we can get into this conversation. I wish I had hold music for you, but I don't. But we'll be there very shortly. I promise we'll get started in just a moment. Getting there. I promise we're going to start. I just want to make sure I share this link with people who are trying to watch the show so you can participate in the chat live. Oh, thank you. Someone says they miss me on other platforms. Well, I am right here. Sharing, 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 sharing. Again, while you're waiting for me to share, we're going to get started in less than like 2 minutes. I really encourage you to share this link live so people can join in the conversation. I will give a little disclaimer. If you are one of those people who screams all lives matter, this content, this style of sharing, this storytelling might not be for you. If you're someone who says, like, I'm colorblind, I don't see color, this content might not be for you. You might not be ready enough to hear how, like, explicitly and real I discuss my experiences, process it, share my stories, and then give insight. So if you're one of those people, I am happy to on any other platform, or if you write a comment and ask for, support, to give you those resources, give you maybe if you're white, a white ally to process that with. But again, this content is really to help push people who are already on the journey, who have already accepted racism is real, or may be real, and want to know how does that impact other people? How do I maybe change? How do I have more self-reflection and application to make the necessary ongoing change? So again, if you're one of those people where like you don't believe it's a thing or whatever, this content might not be for you. All right, so it's shared out to everybody. Let's get started. I want to keep this, I'm trying to keep all the episodes to 30 minutes or less. So again, if you have a question or comment, please post it at any point during this live recording, and I will address it likely either in the moment or at the end of the recording, so people can, I don't think you're alone. If you have a question, I promise you someone else probably does too. So I'm going to get into the stories. And then the self-reflection. And then if there's questions or comments, I'll address those. Again, please go back and watch episode 1 and 2 if you haven't already. That's going to give you a lot of context to where we're at in this particular story. So let me explain to you some of the dangers. Towards the end of this episode, we're going to talk about the dangers that some mixed kids can fall into, the pitfalls. If you're a parent who doesn't help acknowledge all aspects of your mixed kid's identity, especially if your mixed child happens to be a person of color, whether that's Black, or African, African American or African, or Indigenous person, or any Latin American, Hispanic, Latino background, regardless of where you may be from, if you identify as a person of color in your mixed heritage, it's really crucial that you let your child know, especially as they're going through adolescence and going into early adulthood, in this particular experience, that being other and different is not necessarily bad. Because those scholarships are there to help you have an advantage. So I'll get into that later. Let me explain to you a little bit more about you and about me, and share this story and why it's so important to the second part of today. So again, I am mixed, Black and white. I do not know my biological father, and I was raised by my biological mother and my stepfather, my white stepfather. Now, the reason I share that is through some of these stories, I think a lot of people might think that, I really am expressing or explaining my parents in a negative way. Well, I'm not, okay? Let me just say this. My mom throughout my childhood did, try to buy me Black Barbies and dolls, and, try to do my hair the way people would recommend that she do my hair. But really it just led to me wearing a lot of ponytails and a lot of French braids, and not having a lot of Barbie dolls that were the color of my skin, and that kind of thing. But for the most part, I was raised white. I tell people that because I was really raised as if though I was a tan white person. Truly, my family does not really acknowledge that I am a person of color and that I may experience the world differently just because of the color of my skin. That's how we get into this story. an example of that to demonstrate to you that I'm not exaggerating and that I'm not a bitter, mixed kid in any sense. I'm really proud of my parents and I love them. This is just a place where they really fell short. And there's some dangers to that, not just my parents, but also my family. So if you watched episode 1 and 2, you know that I had some racial experiences early in my childhood, so that I did not and still do not trust my parents with my racial experience, and therefore didn't share with them a lot of the, racist things I experienced in my childhood and going on into adulthood. Well, that brings me to this story. This story is another story where I experienced a kind of a microaggression, one of those small, like covert digs that makes you feel kind of icky about yourself. And that I was about 19 years old and I didn't really know how to handle this particular situation because, again, it was with a family member. So the context here is I think most of us all have that family member, right? Like the loud one that's always making a scene or doing something crazy or just a little quirky or whatever. Well, needless to say, amongst my cousins, I'm that person. But my aunts and uncles, I have one particular aunt. I won't say this aunt's name, but she's that aunt. And we were celebrating my maternal grandfather's birthday, and he loved casinos, loved to gamble. And so we had all agreed to go this one specific, very rural, very country, out of the way, kind of backwoods casino for his birthday. Everybody got hotel rooms. We were going to, gamble, do birthday cake, all of that stuff. To celebrate my grandfather's birthday and be as a family. Now, I've always been very busy, going to school, working full time, chasing my dreams, founding a nonprofit, doing lots of things that made it that although my family is very important, I still had to handle those other obligations. And so in this particular case, most of my family was already checked into the hotel, in their bathing suits, in the swimming pool, in the hot tub, well before I got there. And so I got there, I dropped my bag at my parents', hotel room. I got changed in my swimsuit because, a family member was like, yeah, a whole bunch of them are down there at the hot tub. I'm like, sweet. So I go to the hot tub. The first thing I did notice was that there was only one other Black person in the room. Pretty typical in my life experience. Some Black man just swimming in the pool, minding his business, doing his thing. My family is in a cluster in the hot tub. They have taken over, monopolized the hot tub. A whole bunch of, aunts, uncles, cousins in the hot tub. And that one aunt was also in the hot tub. So I get in the hot tub and I sit down and we're talking. And this Black gentleman happens, just gather up stuff, probably finish his swim, gets up and leaves the pool area. I didn't really think anything of it. And my aunt, this special aunt, doesn't really have an inside voice. None of my family really does, but this particular aunt does not know how to whisper. And so she kind of says this comment. She goes, well, that's awkward. And I look at her and I'm like, what, aunt? What's awkward? She was like, well, that guy. In my head, I'm like, what? He was just swimming and he left. So I was like, what's so awkward about it? Now, before I even asked that, what's so awkward about it? I kind of got that icky feeling in my stomach. I was like, please don't tell me it's because he's Black. But I wait for it. I'm like, let's just see where this is going, people. So I'm like, what? What's so weird about it? She's like, well, because he's Black. And I looked at my aunt and I was like, I'm Black. And I kid you not, no pause. My aunt looks me straight in my face and goes, no, you're not. Can you see my sign? Do you see this hair? Do you see my skin? And I just took pause. And at the time, I didn't even fight her. I didn't follow up with a question like, what do you mean? Like, I'm mixed. I'm not Black. Like, what? I was at such a pause. I just didn't say anything. And until about 2 weeks ago, I never even told my mom or my father or anybody else this moment even happened. I just took pause like, wow. Right, that's how they see me. So when I tell people, my family raised me the only way they knew how, which was white. It's true. They really just raised me as another tan white person. Now, some of you, I would be like, what's the harm in that, Tiffany? Well, let me explain. That story is exactly kind of what led into how I internalized some racism. Also, my stepfather is pretty bigoted, and he's also very fiscally conservative. That being said, I was ingrained at a young age, like, oh, don't use the system, don't abuse the system, work hard. That on top of being taught at a very young age that people who are different than you are kind of not good. Well, you try to synthesize that because I was ingrained with a great work ethic. I work really hard at everything I've ever done. But I also know that people of color, specific groups, especially descendants of slaves, are a huge generational disadvantage in this country. And so it took me a while to really synthesize and grapple with that and put that together. But I was raised basically like everybody else in my family, white, very white. I never had the talk with my parents about what to do when you're pulled over, except what white people tell their kids to do. License and registration, be nice to the officer. And actually, to be honest with you all, that was never an explicit conversation. Very different conversations happen. Very different experiences. And I'm going to share that next week, what happened recently when my stepfather was pulled over by the police. Very different than what happens when my friends of color get pulled over by the police. So my aunt sat there, looked me in my face and said, "You're not Black." And I thought, that's crazy. So experiencing racism throughout my life, realizing that I was very much different, but everybody pretended I wasn't. What is the downfall to that? Treating me like I wasn't different when I am, and not acknowledging that my difference doesn't make me bad or less than. Well, it came time to apply for college. Now, I knew enough that I was Black, clearly, because, my step-grandfather called me colored and never even met me. I was called the N-word on multiple occasions. Racism existed. I knew I was Black, but what nobody told me was how Black you had to be to check the Black box. Throughout my entire childhood, I just decided to be a rebel, and I was going to check whatever box I wanted. Black and white, both, just Black. I never just checked just white, because even as a young kid, I knew, like, that's not me, even though my parents are. Like, I'm clearly brownish or something, but nobody told me what Black was Black enough. So I knew I was brown enough. So when the paperwork came for college to register as a TRIO student, I was a first-generation person of color. Now, I wasn't low income because of my parents' income, but I was a first-generation student of color. So I did get a TRIO scholarship, not the full Pell Grant again, but I did get a TRIO scholarship to go into an early summer bridge program. I got 2 free classes going into my freshman year. We started 6 weeks early, moved on campus early, had a mentor, and did, basically to try to help us as kids who are coming from families who have never done college before. And that was me. Might have came from a white family, but my family had never done 4-year college before. I, my friend, was the first. And I was the only person of color in my family. So needless to say, I'm just doing a whole lot of things nobody really understood. My parents did not help with any of my applications. I never went on any college visits. They were mad that I didn't go to the one college they told me I should go to. So I was really on my own. So when it came time to apply for scholarships, I looked through the paperwork, I realized I didn't know what a lot of this stuff meant. Not coming from a Black family and not coming from, an open-minded, down white family, there was terminologies on these forms that I never knew. So when I looked at the paperwork and saw a Pan-African scholarship, I assumed that definitely wasn't for me. Students with African heritage, I'm like, well, I didn't know what that meant. When I went through the databases, the national databases of scholarships, of course I would pick mixed race or Black, but once the scholarships popped up, I really hesitated to fill out scholarships that were for Black students. I felt like I was cheating the system because of how my stepfather raised me. Like, Tiffany, you're not all Black. That's for the real Black kids. So I missed out almost on a $2,500 and a $10,000 scholarship. Thankfully, due to my academics, I actually did get a $25,000 scholarship to go to the private college that I chose to go to without any minority advantage. But you guys, I didn't fill out any of the Black student African-American scholarships. And this school was expensive. So there I was doing a trio event during the summer before school year even started. And I was walking down the hallway, and probably the most beautiful, regal, powerful Black woman I've ever seen in my life charges up to me and she's like, "Hey, why didn't you apply for that scholarship?" I was like, "What? What are you, what, how do you know who I am?" She's like, "Well, what's your name?" And I said, "Tiffany Ram." She was like, "Well, your list isn't on my scholarship applications, and I'm the director of the Pan-African Center for the college." I said, "Wow, I don't even know what that is." She was like, "Yeah, it's a center for everybody from the whole entire African diaspora." And I was like, "What's the diaspora?" I didn't know the language. I didn't have the vocabulary to even discuss, like, what? I didn't know I was Black enough. I knew exactly what she was talking about. She's like, "Tiffany, you didn't apply for the Pan-African Student Scholarship." And I said, "No, I didn't." And I didn't want to tell her that I didn't know I was Black enough, but I didn't really know what else to say to one of the most powerful, amazing Black women I've seemed to ever come across really in my whole life. Up to that moment, this woman had an energy that radiated that was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I don't know." I said, "I didn't know I was Black enough for a Pan-African scholarship." She's like, "That's what Pan-African means." She's like, "Of course you're Black enough. Look at you." And I was like, "Oh." She's like, "Well, I'm the director and I need you to apply. I'm pretty sure you qualify." So I did. And the next year and the following 3 years, I got the Pan-African scholarship. But that was a huge fail almost for me. And that's when she told me, like, "Of course you're Black enough. How Black do you think you have to be?" And I was like, "I don't know. I didn't have BET growing up. Like, I don't know, like, certain shows." She's like, "That doesn't make you Black." She's like, "You're a melanated person. Is one of your parents Black?" And I was like, "The one I don't know." She's like, "That does not matter. You're Black to me." So I found out I was Black. I found out I was Black enough. That internalized insecurity of not wanting to use the system or not knowing if I was Black enough and not knowing the vocabulary. I didn't know what diaspora even meant. I didn't know what Pan-Africanism was. And that put me at a huge disadvantage. I almost lost out on scholarships. And some of them I did the first year, but then I knew with the help of an amazing mentor what to do the following years. I'm blessed to have white and Black and all people of color mentors and allies throughout my life that wanted to make sure like I didn't fall through the gaps just because my parents didn't see color. You guys see the color. The color is good. Difference is good. Just because I'm different doesn't mean you treat me less than. Just because my color of my skin right now does seem to be a disadvantage. Black disadvantage in America is real. But acknowledge that disadvantage and help me. Help me. I have mixed cousins that my parents recently gave advice to my uncle about. Just treat them like everybody else. You all, please don't treat us like everybody else. Acknowledge we're different and embrace it. Encourage it. Don't just treat us like everybody else. If you're mixed, like African and white or Asian and Mexican, embrace all of that. Embrace every single part of the culture. Let that mixed kid synthesize that for themselves. Expose them. Let them decide what their mixedness means for them. And definitely don't leave them at a disadvantage. My parents left me at a huge disadvantage. I already was disadvantaged being first generation. Like, I did these applications by myself. I got recommendations from teachers by myself, employers by myself, submitted the paperwork by myself, mailed it to the post office myself. I did everything for college myself. I got into a private college and started without ever going on a college campus visit. I went in blind, guys, completely blind. Don't leave your kids, especially mixed kids, at an advantage. Yeah, they might be able to check all the boxes. Check away, check all the boxes. You can be all the boxes. And that box that says other, fill it in. Write all the things if you want to. Who is it to tell you who you are? I share the story about my aunt telling me I'm not Black because it sticks out to me strongly to this day. The same people who yell at me on my Facebook are the same people who apparently don't even realize that I'm different than them and that that's okay. I love my Blackness. I love my whiteness too. I love some of the foods that my family eats that I know typical Black folks would never eat. I love cheese. But one thing I needed to know was that I was Black enough to fill out certain documents, to claim it proudly, to say, hey, I am brown and I am in college. Count me. Count me. I graduated in 4 years with a 3.5 GPA. I graduated my master's degree in less than 13 months with a 3.9. Count me in that Black statistic. Count me in that Black statistic. A first-generation college student finishing in 4 years? I did that. And because of my parents, I almost didn't. Without some of those scholarships, those people of color scholarships, without TRIO, you guys, first-generation student of color, if I wouldn't have had that, I wouldn't have been able to go to college. Without the Pan-African Student Center, without the Pan-African Student Union, I wouldn't have been able to come into my full Blackness. I wouldn't have the resources to come into who I am today. The reflection, the do's and the don'ts. There's a huge danger in internalizing racism. It causes colorism in all cultures. There's so many cultures that have colorism. They teach you lighter is better. Let me tell you, that's got to stop. Internalized racism will have you do things to your hair or your skin that are just not healthy. Internalized racism will make you not love you enough or acknowledge your own identity to the point of disadvantage. Just imagine if I would have looked my mentor in the face and been like, no, I'm not going to apply for that. That's for other Black people. No, I'm not too good to say, hey, Black disadvantage is real. Give me that scholarship. Give me that grant. Give me that internship. Give me that assistantship. Give me that opportunity. Because once I'm there, let me tell you, I'm going to max it out. Don't let internalized racism ruin your children's opportunities. It starts with the parents and educators and mentors. I'm so thankful for the parents, the teachers in my life, and the mentors that I had that saw some of the damage that was being done by my family and went out of their way to say, hey, listen, you are Black enough. I went on to become the chaplain and the vice chair of the Pan-African Student Union for a period of time, and planning events and coordinating and telling other mixed kids that they're Black enough. I wasn't the first, and I certainly was not the last. Why do you think my mentor came up to me? Because she was like, there's a mixed kid who doesn't know that this scholarship's for them. And thankfully, I was able to recruit other mixed kids like, hey, you're Black enough too. This scholarship's for you too. This student group is for you too. A resource for all of us. Hey, a lot of us are first-generation college students, and this stuff is a mess. There's a lot to navigate. I know if you're watching this series, you're realizing like, Tiff, this is intense. A lot of people tell me that. Tiff, you know, your stuff's so like intense. I'm like, I know. But I want to lighten it up because, again, the silver lining here is that because someone noticed it right away and acknowledged it, it didn't leave me at a crippling disadvantage. Because someone was able to reach out to me and tell me, hey, you are Black enough, come get this scholarship. I came and got this scholarship because I was willing to be self-reflective and go, hey, that is for me. She's telling me it's for me. I was able to get those scholarships. I was able to finally engage in a discovery of my Blackness that I had always wanted, but feared and didn't have the resources for. I had a lot of white allies growing up in my hometown, but I didn't really have a lot of Black representatives, and representation is everything. So once I got to college and I was submersed in the Pan-African Student Union, I was able to see like the spectrum that is Blackness and to say, hey, that's me. And that's what most mixed kids need. We need to be exposed to all of our identities and given the freedom to make that what it is for ourselves. I never just claim to be Black. Of course I'm Black. Duh, look at me. But yes, I'm mixed and I have a very mixed kids experience. And it makes me a very unique person, have different perspectives than other people. It makes me who I am. So don't miss those opportunities. If you're a mixed kid watching this, I want you to know, especially a Black and white mixed kid or a Black and anything kid, you are Black enough. Apply for that scholarship. Check all the boxes. If you're a mixed kid of any other mix, no, you can check the Mexican box. You can check the Native American box. You check any box that you know applies to you. You are enough. My nieces and nephews are white, Native American, and Mexican. And I always check in with my niece about making sure she feels, that we support her Mexican heritage or Native American heritage. Is she proud of it? And she says yes every time. I'm like, okay, I just want you to know I love you and I love your culture and anything I can do to support it. And she always kind of smiles like, yeah, for sure. So do that. Engage. Expose your mixed kids and let them come into their identity. Treating them like they're everybody else and you don't see color is really, really damaging. It leaves your children at a disadvantage. Fully expose them. Even if you don't know, well, lead with curiosity. Learn together. I want to take an opportunity to acknowledge any comments or questions over here. And then I'm going to close out. Again, I'm not here because I have all the answers. I'm here to share my stories because I know I'm not the only one. I know I'm not alone. And I hope by sharing these stories, it empowers you to, one, start talking about it with other people. Maybe, process it for yourself. Or maybe it will help a parent or a kid get to that next stage, wherever that is for them. Let me see. I'm reading these comments. Make sure I didn't miss anything important. Doesn't look like it. I don't see any actual questions, so that's good. I do see Mixed by Story. I do see Truth Be Told. I do see Derek and Baller and Samat, I think. Hopefully I'm saying all your names right. What I want to say is this. I see a comment that says something about, talking, smack. It is not talking smack. This is just me engaging in a meaningful way, telling my story as a way to hopefully help empower other people. And also shed light on the reality. Racism is very real. And for me, some of the most racist experiences and that affected me and that I can remember were right in my own family. Some of the most memorable microaggressions and, covert racism I experienced was right in my own family. And so I think by sharing those stories with people, it makes it very real in regards to how real and how subtle racism can be sometimes. My family is probably the same, are a good portion of them are probably the people that are like, no, I'm not racist. I have a Black niece. No, I'm not racist. I have a mixed, cousin. I'm not racist. I have a mixed friend. Like, listen, pause. If someone's calling you out and saying something you said might be inappropriate or a comment or a joke you made is inappropriate, especially if it's coming from a person of color, I don't care who your friend or your niece or your granddaughter is, you should probably take pause. And your next question should probably be, wait, why do you think that's racist? I didn't mean to offend you. Like, what about that is racist? And instead of being defensive, pause and actually listen. Listen to what they're telling you. If someone of color stops you and is like, whoa, what's that about? And they call you out, listen. You are not the expert on people of color experience if you're not a person of color. And just because you're a person of color doesn't mean you're the expert of everybody's experience who is persons of color. I know nothing about being Native American. I know nothing about, being Latina. I know nothing about actually being of another culture. I speak another language. I've lived in other countries, but that doesn't mean I'm an expert on any of that. I would never project knowing that experience on somebody else. If someone calls you out, I don't care who you know or what you think you know, follow up with genuine curiosity. My bad. What makes you think that's inappropriate? I didn't even know. Or if you did it on purpose, you better take that. I tell my family that right now, all over my private pages, not my public pages, but my private pages. I remind my family, nobody gets a pass anymore. Everybody's getting called out. Just because you know me doesn't mean you get to be inappropriate or get some weird racist grace. No. All the more reason that I should let you know what you're doing and saying is not okay and why it's not okay. I see a few more comments and then I'm going to wrap up. I apologize for being a little late today. Technology is always fun, so we're figuring it out as we go. Yeah, so there's a comment in here in regards to like 6 degrees of separation from the mother or whatever. I'm not going to acknowledge like the history of ADOS, African descendants of slaves, or like the one drop rule really that much here, or that kind of thing. I'm very well versed in that. I have a lot of personal feelings and opinions on those kinds of things. This is just not that platform at this time in this particular series. But just know, a lot of people have a lot of things in them. If you are curious to know, most people do have a little bit of African heritage or a little bit of European heritage in them, no matter how Black or how white you think you are. And so in regards to other ethnicities, whether it be, like Latina, or if you're actually of African heritage, not an African descendant of slavery, I can't speak towards that. But in regards to the United States, there's a lot of indigenous people already here. There's a lot of indigenous people already here. This country was not ours. We took it. So that's just the history books. So I'm not going to get too much into like specific historical stuff in this particular series, but I want to give present day stories and experiences just to remind people that this is not an old issue. Racism is very real. It's still very much alive, and it impacts people in very real ways every single day. And I think the unique perspective is that mixed kids, we've all had very different experiences. We're all very different, but we all tend to have, not we all, but a good portion of us tend to have commonalities and through lines in our stories of like milestones that mark how we came into our identity, conversations either that did or did not happen that led us to where we are and our markers for identity. Now, the interesting part is this is not exclusive to mixed kids. This is pretty much applies to everybody. But in regards to this series, because racism is very real and we're very polarized in regards to colorism in the United States, it was impressed upon me to give a platform for that dialogue and that conversation in my own stories. So again, I know a lot about all of that. I've read a lot. I've been exposed to a lot. I've studied a lot, but this is not that platform. So again, I want to remind you to like this video, share it with friends and family, and also subscribe to Tiff Talk TV so you get alerts for next time we're live. We will be back next Sunday. Again, one more episode. One more episode before I start the Mixed Kid Dialogue part of this series, which is me interviewing other mixed kids. So one more episode that you can look forward to. Part of this story is going to be the next episode's lighthearted. I want to tell you there's a light at the end of the tunnel, that there's not all negative things. So I'm going to share another one, like exposure to racism story, but also the positive sides to being mixed. Some of the quirky things my family did do to try to address my identity, and really in my story, the shining light that helped me have a healthy identity despite racism in my own family and in my community. So gonna just share the light in the next episode, a little more lighthearted part of Mixed Kid Monologues. And hopefully the point is that those positives is what I think has led me to still have loving and appreciative relationships with my family, although I've had these experiences. So that's what the next episode's all about. Again, it's not all dark and gloom. It's not like, oh, racism's ended my life, I'm so bitter and angry and all of that. No, I want you all to know that if you take certain steps and you use certain skills, that you can have loving relationship with everybody, and that you can have a healthy identity, because I feel like I do very much so. So that's what you can look forward to for next week. So again, I'm Tiffany Ram. This is Mixed Kid Monologues, and I'm here because I believe we can end racism, but first we have to acknowledge it even exists.